Hi, I'm Eric Gales. I'm the country manager of AWS Canada.
Hi, Eric. Thanks for taking the time. I'm really excited to speak with you today. Amazon recently put out its global digital skills study. So I want to ask, what were the key takeaways and findings from that report? And also, from your perspective, what were the implications in terms of Canada's future economy and our workforce?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Tim. Well, it's great to be here to start with. I'd start by saying, it won't surprise you to know that, that report told us a little bit more about what we already knew, which is that as the world continues to digitize and the use of digital technologies in every industry and every government becomes more important, then obviously skills need to be acquired, and there is a gap. And so there is a gap globally with the amount of skills to help businesses and governments leverage these new digital capabilities. Of course, that applies to Canada. One of the things that I've really spent a lot of time thinking about in the course of my career, and most acutely over the course of the last 6 years with AWS and Amazon, working with many customers and government, is that the really the only sustainable competitive advantage for a business or a country is innovation. And increasingly, that innovation depends on the ability of companies and governments to use digital capabilities to serve their customers as well as to serve citizens. And so as we think about the evolution of the Canadian economy, it's going to be increasingly important that we can empower our workers with the skills they need to leverage these digital capabilities. The survey itself, it did survey both IT practitioners as well as what we call end users. And 71% of Canadians workers that were surveyed indicated that they were not confident that they were acquiring skills fast enough. And so we need to do something about that. And then if we look at the number of skills that need to be acquired, we estimate through that survey that around 6.5 million Canadian workers will need to be trained over the course of the next few years in order for us to be effective at both building tools using these digital capabilities as well as being able to empower our workers to use these digital capabilities. And we know from the survey that those companies that do invest in empowering their workers with the skills to use these digital capabilities are both their workers are more satisfied, they're more effective, and they also retain their staff more frequently if they invest in their skills.
Obviously, a very crucial area to focus on. Now, it's no secret we're in the middle of this pandemic, hopefully coming towards the end. How has the pandemic shifted the skills that we need to compete, to succeed in the future economy? And what barriers have you seen Canadians facing in terms of them gaining and acquiring those skills?
I think I'd start with just an observation. I'm sure there were no business leaders, no government leaders that one day sort of went to work and said, you know what, hey, we should try what would happen if we all just worked from home. And so this pandemic was a huge forcing function to cause companies to have to adapt and government to adapt to a new set of challenges. And so you had people who perhaps had never been used to using web conferencing before, compelled to, A, you had to set it up, and B, you had to be comfortable using web technologies. You had businesses being forced to adapt to do curbside delivery, or restaurants that had to do delivery to their customers in their local domains. And so it was a huge forcing function for companies and government to lean on technologies. And of course, through that, they discovered a few things. In many cases, they didn't have the skills in-house to move quickly to leverage these digital technologies. And whenever you have any kind of change, particularly technology change, it requires end users, the people actually going to use these tools, to be comfortable migrating and adapting to those new approaches. And so we have seen the pandemic be a huge forcing function, particularly with regards to the adoption of cloud-based services that bring a level of innovation and capability that many of these customers didn't have before. And so we've seen a huge interest in accelerating their adoption of these capabilities. We see that over the course of time, everything's going to move to the cloud. The majority of applications and workflows will move to the cloud because it's so effective at helping customers to focus on leveraging and using the tools versus owning and operating infrastructure. But in order to do that, you need the skills to build and manage and deploy solutions into this environment, and you need the skills with your end users to actually consume them. And so we have a huge focus as a company, working with many other entities on trying to ensure that we can equip people with the skills that they need to leverage these new capabilities. One manifestation of that is a service we launched recently called AWS Skills Builder. It's a new digital learning experience. It's online, but it's free. It's available to anybody to go and use. There are 500 courses on there with a whole range of different elements that are relevant to different people in that continuum of digital usage, as well as practitioners on the IT side. And we've made a global commitment as a company to train 29 million people by 2025.
I want to read a quote, and it's actually a statistic that you mentioned in your first response, which is 6.5 million Canadian workers must be trained in the next year to keep pace with technological advancements and succeed in their careers. That's a lot of people in a relatively short amount of time. I'd like to name a number of stakeholders and ask you what each of those, or what you think each of those has to prioritize to make that happen. Starting with government, what do you think government's key priorities are to get those 6.5 million Canadians trained over the next year?
Yeah, well, I think if you look at the landscape, you're right. 6.5 million Canadian workers is probably the vast majority of workers, adult workers. And so what this is indicating is that everybody needs to get more comfortable using these technological advancements. From a government perspective, obviously what we want the government to do is to continue to advocate and to work with the private sector to create opportunities for people to acquire the skills. And that needs to be applied broadly, both at one end of the spectrum, from obviously in education through academic institutions and all the work that we do there to make sure that our people entering the workforce join with a set of skills, and actually, with this very specific focus on encouraging more entrance into the IT sector in particular, because that is an area where there is a very high demand for new roles, new people, and also it's an area where there are lots of high-paying jobs, and it's going to be a big part of our sort of go-forward economy in Canada, all the way through to helping companies to equip their existing workers with acquiring these new skills to use these new capabilities. And so we find that it's most important that the government works with private sector, works with academia to look at the full continuum of how can we help all of our workers acquire the skills they need to be effective in the roles they're in, whether they're at one end of the spectrum, an IT practitioner, or whether they're an end user. We're finding that it's very powerful when you can bring government focus with private sector investment and academic institutions and create an environment where you can make these skills available. And so that's something that we spend a lot of time focusing on trying to advocate with government, to work closely with government across the country to create environments where we can make these skills available, and we can highlight the importance of every organization, both government and private sector, in investing in helping their workers acquire skills and encouraging more entrance into the workforce to have a destination of the IT workspace. I think the one that I would highlight, from a government perspective, Tim, obviously the government itself, it's important that part of what we spend our time helping both businesses and government understand is what the art of the possible is. What is contemporary now? What do these digital technologies really mean? And how do you apply them? And why are they relevant to Canada? And so one of the things that we've instituted is we have a program called AWS DigiGov, which is actually a program for public sector employees, because we think it's important that we spend some time and energy helping our government officials and bureaucrats understand why this technology is important, how to apply it, not just within government, but also to help them advocate for that externally into the wider Canadian market. And so this was something that we had originally piloted within the University of Ottawa's Professional Development Institute, and it's been rolled out since into a much wider audience across government to help our government workers really understand and our leaders understand the importance of these capabilities and why it's important that we continue to advocate, create programs, look for more opportunities to collaborate with private sector to drive the adoption of digital skills within the Canadian market.
Eric, I want to ask, obviously, gender diversity and inclusion has been an important topic, is an important topic when we're speaking about the tech ecosystem and digital skills. What do you think has to be done in Canada to increase diversity and inclusion in our digitally skilled labor force? And I'm speaking here about gender diversity, inclusion of Indigenous people and other underrepresented groups. What are your thoughts on that?
I think, firstly, this is something that that you really have to care about, and so it starts with a real appreciation of what the value of diversity is. And I'd say AWS and Amazon personally, something that we're very committed to. And so it starts with an acknowledgement of the value of diversity, and then looking at, if you really do value diversity, what can you do to encourage a diverse workforce to come and work with you, for you, and then how can you ensure that once they're within your environment that they are included and you get to maximize the potential of that diversity. And so for a long time, at least in the IT sector, we've had a challenge with attracting women into the workforce, particularly if you look at the sort of the distribution of male versus female. And so that's something that we obviously want to focus on. And then because of the rate of the adoption of digital technologies, it hasn't been accessible to all of the people that we'd like to engage in our workforce. And so one of the things that I think we have to focus on is making sure that we meet people where they are, to give them opportunities to engage with and acquire the skills they need to participate in this digital workforce. And so that obviously starts at one end of the spectrum. It's about in the education sector, in academia, so helping to deploy programs into that environment to enable students to start to get more interested in this area, to acquire the skills. And so we have some specific programs at AWS, like a program called AWS Educate, which helps academic institutions deploy programs to help people acquire skills and perhaps take a career in the IT sector. And then with underemployed and unemployed and underserved populations, you need a very specific focus there, because of course they're just naturally excluded because they're underserved. And so you have to take a very deliberate approach to say, that is a community we want to engage. And so I mentioned a program earlier, AWS Restart. That program, at least in Canada, we have it very specifically focused at this audience of underemployed and underserved populations, and recently launched a focus specifically on Indigenous peoples, reaching out to them to create an environment where they could participate in this cloud adoption skills program that would give them an entry point into the IT sector. One of those programs was run in conjunction with the Bank of Montreal, and the Bank of Montreal has offered internships to those people that enter that program. And so not just giving those people an opportunity to acquire some skills, but also to get their first opportunity to work for a commercial organization and apply those skills. The other part of that, of course, is that once people are in your organizations, you want to focus on retaining them. And so this focus on an ongoing training program and skills development program, the digital environment is accelerating very quickly. And so it's innovating very quickly. And so the pace of innovation is high. And so if the pace of innovation is high, the skills development programs also need to keep pace with that. And so the way that we think about delivering training, the way we think about how people consume it, also continues to evolve to sort of map that so that you can help people acquire the skills at the rate they need to in order to continue to be effective.